Una delle menti creative più importanti attive nel mondo dell'entertainment, la signora Gale Anne Hurd, ospite della masterclass del Roma Fiction Fest. Prego. Benvenuta a Roma, grazie di essere qui. Allora, io vorrei, prima di parlare di The Walking Dead, cioè arriveremo a The Walking Dead tramite queste clip che lei ci ha, che lei ha preparato per noi, volevo chiederle come si è avvicinata al mondo del cinema. Lei ha una carriera unica a Hollywood e non solo, una produttrice di immenso successo sia nel cinema che in televisione, e poi oggi sappiamo che lei sta facendo tantissime cose, non soltanto in questi due segmenti, ma addirittura nei fumetti, insomma, nell'entertainment in generale. Ecco, volevo chiedere come è nata la sua passione per il cinema, per la televisione, quando c'è un momento che lei ricorda nella sua vita, che ha detto io voglio fare questo, voglio fare film, voglio diventare una filmmaker.
I've been a fan of film, of cinema, of fiction in all of its many forms since I first learned to read. And I began my journey into genre, science fiction, fantasy, and horror very early. I had an older brother, and he loved comic books. So at first I started reading comic books. And then we had what was in the US, it was called a double feature. So I'd go to see 2 movies at a time. I probably developed my love then. But the moment where it all shifted for me was when I was in college, when I was in university at Stanford, at their foreign study program in England. I had a class in British film and broadcasting. And not only did we watch 2 movies every day, we also watched 2 documentaries. And I thought, I can't believe this is something that I could make a career out of. And that was the moment. It was actually at university where I realized that this is something that people do, because I was meeting them. I was meeting the great directors, the great producers, which I'd never done before. And then I got my first job working for Roger Corman.
Ecco, lei parlava del genere, lei l'ha reinventato un po' questo genere. I film che stiamo a vedere sono dei classici, sono dei film che hanno cambiato la percezione del genere, cioè lei non è soltanto una persona che ha proseguito una carriera, ma i film che ha fatto sono stati dei film innovativi. Volevo chiederle quanto coraggio ci vuole a pensare out of the box, perché è veramente un cinema nuovo, un approccio nuovo alla cinematografia, al fare cinema. Non è stato facile, immagino, fare questa transizione.
You know, I was inspired first by Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey. That was the first time that as an audience member I saw the science fiction film treated like what we call an A movie as opposed to a B movie. And that film and that filmmaker inspired me. I never thought that there would be this kind of impact, which you can only realize in retrospect. You don't see it at the time. You just have a story that you're dying to tell, and you have the right filmmaker. And in my case, it was the collaboration with Jim Cameron, who, when I met him, was building little spaceship models in a dark room in Venice, California, working for Roger Corman on a movie called Battle Beyond the Stars. But we shared this passion for film, for cinema, for the opportunity to tell genre stories and not treat them like they were disposable, but character-driven, and they could be about something. So that was my transition.
Vogliamo vedere una clip di quelle che sono state preparate. Prima vediamo la clip e poi la commentiamo dopo. È anche un film, glielo dico, uno dei film che amo di più come spettatore, non come critico. È sicuramente uno dei film che ha avuto un grande impatto anche sulla mia vita, insomma, quello che può interessare al pubblico, non solo di tutto il mondo. Prego, vediamo rivederlo sul grande schermo fa sempre, insomma, non è invecchiato di un giorno questo film. Volevo chiedere, io ricordo, ero tra il pubblico, ero ragazzino quando ho visto questo film e ricordo che pensai, ma Arnold Schwarzenegger, quello di Conan di Lorenzo, voi avete inventato la carriera di Arnold Schwarzenegger. Ora, questa è un po' una caratteristica del suo cinema, del suo lavoro, trovare gli attori giusti per i film e fargli fare dei ruoli fantastici. Come avete pensato a lui? Come è nato questa storia e questo film?
You're giving me way too much credit, first of all, because truthfully, the character of the Terminator was initially in Jim and in both of our vision was to be played by someone who is very unassuming, someone who would blend in, which of course Arnold Schwarzenegger doesn't exactly blend in, and he was going to be played by the actor Lance Henriksen, who played one of the detectives. And it was actually Orion, it was Mike Medavoy at Orion, so you can give him the credit, who said, you know, the character, you should meet, actually, he said, you should meet Arnold Schwarzenegger. He would be great in this movie. But what we didn't know is that Mike had told Arnold that he would be playing the Reese character. So Jim and I went to meet him, and he said, and all he talked about was the Terminator. And he was so enthusiastic, and Jim said, you know, it's a character that I think of, he has no emotion, he's like a shark. He's like a shark looking for his next meal. You know, if information isn't necessary, he'll just ignore it and move on. He's implacable, he can't be reasoned with, he can't be bargained with. He has a mission and he's going to accomplish it. So by the end of the lunch, we said, we've got our Terminator, but does he really think he's playing Kyle Reese? And at the end of the lunch, which by the way, neither Jim nor I had money enough to pay for, so Arnold had to pick up the tab, which was one of the more awkward experiences of my career. Trying to talk an actor into being in your film and you can't even pay for the lunch. But at the end he said, I want to play the title role. I want to play the Terminator. So that's the story behind Arnold Schwarzenegger playing the Terminator.
Però qual è una qualità che un produttore deve avere? Perché come in questo caso, la capacità di ascoltare gli altri, cioè dire no, perché qualcuno avrebbe potuto dire no, abbiamo il nostro Terminator, non importa, abbiamo già deciso. Cioè, quali sono le caratteristiche che lei crede bisogna avere per creare questi sogni meravigliosi?
It's absolutely essential to be able to recognize a good idea, wherever it comes from. The minute that you close yourself off to it, you're missing out. And then, as a producer, then your job is to convince the director, the writer, the actors, that maybe change is a good idea, that they should embrace that as well. So that means you have to be a cheerleader, you sometimes have to be what we call in America a drill sergeant, sometimes you have to be a psychologist, you have to wear a lot of different hats to be a successful producer.
Bene, vediamo un'altra clip da un altro film molto importante. Prima di pensare che diciamo, sia Terminator che Alien noi continuiamo a vedere che sono film in programmazione, che vi sappiamo ci saranno seguiti, vorrei chiedere qual è il suo coinvolgimento, come a un certo punto cosa pensa, cioè, di questi film che a un certo punto voi avete inventato delle saghe che in qualche maniera sono rimaste nell'immaginario, allora c'è un momento in cui uno si deve staccare, deve rimanere collegato a questa saga. Qual è il suo rapporto con i suoi figli, se mi passa il termine, cinematografici?
Well, Alien, that trilogy, or that series is very much Ridley Scott. Without Ridley Scott, there would be no Aliens. So,
però io me l'aspettavo, però possiamo dire che il vostro film è a livello, cioè è un film meraviglioso, mentre non potrei dirlo, insomma non è questo di stasera, però forse voi avete un'altra volta fatto un classico e innovato. Dopo non tutti i film sono stati a livello di quello che avete del vostro lavoro, quindi...
You know, when Jim agreed to come on and write the sequel to Alien, he said, I am not going to remake it. I am going to reinvent it. And I'm going to make a combat film. I'm going to make a war film. I'm not going to make almost like a gothic horror film. Even though it was science fiction, it was a very different genre of science fiction or subgenre. You know, so Jim and I did not have the rights to the Alien trilogy or the Alien series, so we weren't involved in the subsequent films there. But when you think about it, the very next director was David Fincher. So it's launched some pretty spectacular careers. And with the Terminator, you know, Jim and I were involved, obviously. He directed the first one, wrote and directed the second. And then from that point on, because of a bankruptcy proceeding, we have been less and less involved to the point now that we're not involved at all. So it's bittersweet.
Sì, anche perché in qualche maniera questo penso che sia abbastanza evidente, è la spinta che voi avete dato a questi film, la vostra invenzione che continua a essere in qualche maniera sfruttata successivamente, quindi forse il pubblico, e questo poi è interessante per una persona che oggi fa televisione, come si può serializzare un racconto in qualche maniera, ecco, perché voi avete dato un'impronta, un timbro che il pubblico spera di vedere in parte, poi magari viene un po' deluso, quindi è importante in qualche maniera riconoscersi in questi prodotti così appunto dei classici come abbiamo visto.
You know, it's one of the reasons why I really enjoy the medium of television. First of all, television is a producer's medium, and we're able to tell in the same amount of time that it takes to make half of a big feature film. We make 16 hours of the TV series. So 16 hours spending time with those characters, telling their stories in that world. And that to me is such a joy, because there can be years and years between features. You know, the cast goes on, they're off on different shows. Whereas with a TV series, I'm with the same cast, the same crew now for 5 years. And you know, it's a bonding experience that is very much part of the collaborative medium that TV is.
Bene, vediamo un'altra clip allora, da un altro film indimenticabile. Credo che vorrete comprare il DVD per sapere come va a finire questa scena, che è una scena indimenticabile anche questa. Io ricordo quando la vidi, and I drowned, come ecco, era questo cinema che il cinema che lei ha fatto era un cinema diverso da quello di oggi. Oggi sono con tutto l'affetto, la stima e la passione per i blockbuster tratti da fumetti erano idee originali. Voi immaginavate delle storie, comunque le inventavate. Come guarda questa transizione da questo cinema così nuovo, così innovativo, che ha formato tutti i cineasti che oggi lavorano così nel mondo, da Christopher Nolan a M. Night Shyamalan, sono tutti fan di questo cinema. Ecco, cosa è successo? Perché non ci sono più idee così originali? Sono gli studios che hanno dei problemi, mancano le idee?
It's fear. It's fear from the studios. they're afraid because, you know, the funny thing is, I mean, The Abyss cost $40 million. The Terminator cost 5.6. Aliens cost 13. Now movies that are considered summer blockbusters cost 200 million or 300 million. That's not the kind of risk that you can make and roll the dice and lose. If you lose that bet, you not only lose your job, you can lose the studio. So the studios make safe choices, and safe choices are just sequels and remakes, and they respond to what the audience is voting for. So the audience votes by buying tickets. So if the audience continues to go see all of the sequels and the remakes and stories that, in my humble opinion, don't have the kind of character development, the kind of depth necessarily that films did in the 80s, then the studios will continue to make those films. You know, so it's very difficult to see something new. You know, Christopher Nolan has had great success with Inception, Jim, with Avatar, but those are very rare, and it's only certain filmmakers who are able to command those resources and get original movies made.
Ecco, però siamo reduci da un'estate, non solo qui in Italia, dove è sempre stata un po' problematica al cinema, ma anche negli Stati Uniti, non molto fortunata. Abbiamo un film, peraltro anche molto divertente, che è in testa da 3 o 4 settimane, mentre tanti tentativi non hanno funzionato. Ecco, insomma, qual è la sua impressione? Perché invece poi in televisione poi uno trova delle serie come The Walking Dead, quindi c'è un cambiamento. Quindi che cosa sta succedendo? Qual è il rapporto tra cinema e televisione negli Stati Uniti? E non solo, perché insomma, quello che succede a Hollywood influenza le vite di tutto il mondo in qualche maniera, cioè le scelte che voi fate in America sono scelte globali. Quindi cosa succede? Perché evidentemente il pubblico non va molto al cinema a vedere le idee non originali di cui parlavamo prima.
I think we are beginning to train viewers that they can have things immediately. That's already going on. You know, people want to binge watch television, they get things immediately, they get information, they get entertainment, they get answers on their smartphones, on their tablets, and you can't access a movie immediately. You know, you have to make arrangements, you have to go to the cinema, you have to buy tickets. So people are beginning to reserve that for only films they just have to see. And if there are films that they're, well, maybe, that becomes a no. In the past, it was, you know, if there was enthusiasm for a film, people would make the time. Their attitude now is, I can just stream it later on Netflix. And I think that, you know, I'm hoping that there will be more movies that will entrance and excite an audience, that they will leave home to go to see them. But I think it's potentially an endangered art form.
Ecco, ora vediamo la clip di un film a cui lei tiene molto, che si chiama in originale Water Dance, in italiano lei sa che noi traduciamo i titoli, si chiama Vita di cristallo, non so perché, però l'ho chiamato così. E quindi volevo chiedere com'è nato invece questo progetto, che è un po' diverso, insomma è un film sempre molto affascinante, molto diverso da quello cui lei ci aveva abituato fino a quel momento.
You know, it's funny, one of the questions I was asked by the press was, how come you never make movies that aren't in the genre? And I had to say, I do make them, you just don't go to see them. I love stories that are about the human condition, whether it's reality. I also make documentaries. And in this case, it was the story of the writer-director, Neil Jimenez. He was a writing, directing student at UCLA, and he had an accident. He fell off a cliff. He woke up in the emergency room with no feeling below the waist. And to me, that was a story that was so powerful. How did he deal with that? How did he come back from that? So it's semi-autobiographical, and I was just so taken with the story. that I took no fee. And, you know, we made this for, I think, under $2 million. And we got a fantastic cast. You'll see in this clip, if you know Wesley Snipes from all the action films that he's done, you'll see him play, or you know, playing sort of a drug lord, you'll see him play a very different role in this.
Vediamo la clip.
In The Walking Dead, the character played by Bill Forsythe was a racist who ends up in a rehabilitation facility in the same ward with an African-American character played by Wesley Snipes, and overcomes his racism. So it's an interesting aspect of the story.
Quali qualità devono avere appunto le storie per interessarla? Io immagino che lei riceva molte sceneggiature, che ovviamente lavorando così tanto si confronti con tante persone, ma che cosa deve avere un progetto per attirare la sua attenzione?
I'm most attracted to the journey that the central character takes. That it's relatable, that it shows some insight into the human condition. I tend to gravitate towards stories about ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances, whether it's a contemporary situation like a character, not even in that clip, Eric Stoltz plays the lead character, someone who wakes up paralyzed, or a story of Ripley, who is an ordinary person working in a loading dock in Aliens, whose greatest nightmare is to go back and face the alien again. But when she realizes that there's a community of miners on this planet that don't know the threat, she has to overcome her fears in order to do that. So that's what time and time again I'm attracted to, and almost all my films share in common.
Ecco, c'era un film che lei poco fa ha firmato un autografo, Alien Nation, non abbiamo la clip, un'altra storia di razzismo, cioè anche usare il genere per raccontare qualcosa di molto molto reale, qualcosa che ci tocca di persone, cioè io credo che questi film al di là del livello di entertainment che hanno sicuramente, parlano di tutti quanti noi. Questo è forse anche c'è una parte di educazione, sicuramente educazione sentimentale, come i grandi romanzi dell'Ottocento in qualche maniera.
You know, I think that every day we have to make choices as human beings. We have to, you know, no matter how small the choice is, we follow different paths based on every choice that we make, and even in a small film like this one, or in a huge movie, it comes down to those moral and ethical choices. So if we're invested in the characters, no matter how big the scope of the film or how small, that's how we connect as filmmakers with an audience, through our characters and the decisions that they make. So I think as long as they're honest, the audience will buy into them, will accept them, embrace them, and hopefully inform them and decisions that they make about their lives on an ongoing basis.
Bene, ora vediamo l'ultima clip che riguarda The Walking Dead, quindi io chiederò ancora un paio di domande alla signora Hurd e poi aprirò la parte alle vostre domande, alle vostre curiosità. Vediamo la clip. Cosa la affascinava di questo progetto? Insomma, è un successo globale che ha varie declinazioni, la serie, poi insomma c'è il fumetto che continua a vivere, poi sappiamo di questa serie Companion che nascerà. Ecco, questa è una saga The Walking Dead, cosa la affascinava? Quando si è avvicinata a questo progetto?
Well, I was a fan of the underlying comic book, which started publishing in about 2003. And what I loved was that The Walking Dead refers to the people in the series. It doesn't refer to the zombies. And, you know, we come to find out that everyone is infected. So, no matter what you die from, you are going to turn into, you'll turn into a zombie. And that raises the stakes across the board, because it means that the fear that you have that your loved one will turn into a zombie and you'll have to kill them, as we've seen many times in the series, or if you turn into a zombie, you could very well kill someone you love. You can't get stakes higher than that. And I loved in the comic book series that it was unflinching, that it didn't shy away from difficult subject matter. And for a comic book to succeed in doing that, which is two-dimensional, you only have, you know, little bubbles for what the characters are thinking and saying, to reach me on that kind of deep level, I thought this would be a fantastic story to tell and share with, I thought, audiences in the US, and then Fox was very smart and said no, audiences around the world. And as long as you keep the main conflict one of moral and ethical choices, that has succeeded with the video game, it's succeeded with the webisodes, and as long as we stay true to that, I think that it's a universal story with universal themes, and it's relevant to all cultures.
Lo vedevamo nel documentario prima di questa masterclass, un fenomeno globale, in tutto il mondo è stata accolta con grande passione. Allora volevo chiedere insomma, come si rapporta con quello che il pubblico si aspetta in qualche maniera dalla serie, qual è la direzione, insomma, perché è un po' come giocare a fare Dio, insomma, perché tu muori, tu vivi, ora arriva quest'altro, cioè costruire un universo narrativo che ha vari ore di televisione, varie annate, varie stagioni, vari personaggi, quindi insomma è una grande pressione, ma può essere anche, credo, molto divertente, molto creativo in tutti i sensi.
Well, the good news is that the creator of the comic book series, Robert Kirkman, is very involved in the show. Not only is he an executive director, he's involved in the writer's room, working with Scott Gimple, our showrunner, to determine where the seasons go, what new characters we introduce, how we vary from the comic book, and surprisingly enough, he's the one who pushes us to vary even more. But we live in a little bubble because we film in the middle of nowhere in a very small town in Georgia. So the cast and the crew create their own Walking Dead family. So for us, the protection of that, the fact that we go to a remote area to make this has really helped us not feel the pressure, because we're not dealing with it every day. We work very, very hard, and yet at the same time we feel an obligation to our fans. We feel very connected to the fans. We have a hashtag on Twitter, TWD Family, because we feel as if the cast, the crew, and the fans are part of one big family. So the fans are not only our greatest supporters, they're also our harshest critics. When they think that we've gotten something wrong, they let us know. But at the same time, by the time we are essentially filming our 13th episode of the season out of 16, that's when the premiere is. So we have to rely on ourselves to get it right, because at that point it's too late to change what we've chosen to tell.
Ed eccoli fan. Allora, sentiamo le domande che avete. Vi prego, allora c'è una domanda qui, poi ci sarà una domanda lì. Allora piano piano cercheremo di accontentarvi tutti. Prego.
Buonasera, io volevo chiedere una cosa. Lei ha già accennato al fatto che la nostra società è una società che va molto veloce, gli smartphone, le mode, e in questo senso volevo chiedere la sua opinione sul perché la televisione invece è una sorta di inversione di tendenza, perché il pubblico si affeziona puntata dopo puntata, vuole stagione dopo stagione, trascorre il tempo su internet. In questo senso è completamente diverso da ciò che la nostra società richiede. Quindi secondo lei qual è la ragione di questo e perché la televisione in un certo senso è riuscita a compiere questo miracolo?
I think that television series, at least in the United States, are very different now than they used to be. They're very character-driven. They have the time in an episode to tell character-driven stories. In the past, they were what we call procedurals. In other words, characters really took a backseat to solving a crime, or finding the bad guy, or if it was a hospital drama, saving the patient, which is all still very successful. But if you miss an episode, it doesn't matter. You can still catch the next one and not fall behind. With serialized storytelling, if you miss an episode, the next one won't make sense. And that's why broadcast television stayed away from it for so long. You can't play the episodes out of order, you can't miss one. Well, the great thing about these devices is that you now have an opportunity, if you miss an episode, to catch up. So it's changed the game in storytelling, and now we're able to tell very character-driven stories where you have to follow one episode with the next one. And we have the ability to do so, which didn't exist before, and I think that's the game changer.
Una domanda lì? Prego.
Buonasera, volevo chiederle una cosa. Di solito gli horror movie sono considerati un po' di serie B, che sono quindi un po' snobbati. Grazie invece a The Walking Dead sembra che siano tornati in auge, soprattutto il tema zombie, tant'è vero che Hollywood ha proposto subito World War Z. Qual è stato l'ingrediente magico, tra virgolette, insomma, l'ingrediente magico del successo di The Walking Dead, e in particolare che cosa le ha fatto decidere di produrre una serie horror che poteva essere, insomma, un po' a rischio?
I've never been afraid of risk, because if you don't try and fail, you'll never try and succeed. So, one of my favorite expressions is you learn more from your failures than your successes, so I'm not afraid. At the same time, we saw, with Aliens. Aliens was the first horror film to be nominated for 7 Academy Awards. So it changed first, I think, in features. And then if you find a filmmaker as talented as Frank Darabont, who created The Walking Dead, he's the person who brought to cinema The Shawshank Redemption, considered, I think, AFI considered it one of the best movies of all time. It really is a combination where you're not stooping to tell the lowest common denominator story set in horror, but one that resonates through character and moral and ethical dilemmas. So that was, I think, the combination that made the difference. Plus, being on both AMC and the Fox channels, they were aiming for the same thing. They didn't want, shall we call it the stupid version? People actually at the networks wondered if it could be a procedural, because initially the 2 main characters were sheriffs. So couldn't they solve a zombie crime every week? So since we didn't have to go that direction, we had the freedom to tell a much slower story that was much more complex and serialized.
Una domanda lì, poi torniamo lì e poi una domanda qui davanti.
Buonasera signora Hurd, e innanzitutto complimenti per il successo globale che ha avuto The Walking Dead. La mia era più una curiosità, volevo sapere se lei segue le serie TV e di conseguenza se c'è una serie sia drama che sitcom che avrebbe voluto produrre.
I saw the Simpsons characters walking around here. I would have loved to produce the Simpsons. I don't know if you get it here, the TV series The Americans.
Yeah.
I think that's a fantastic TV series. I love House of Cards. I loved Breaking Bad. There are a lot of stories, I think, that tell really interesting, character-driven, and complex conflicts. And it can be in a comedic, animated series, or it can be in another, in a show that's on streaming.
Michael, tu vuoi fare una domanda? Perché avevi il microfono? No, tra l'altro, ecco, Michael Esser ha qualcosa da dire sugli American, lui è un produttore tedesco molto famoso, molto... Prego.
I was wondering, you talked before about you and Mr. Cameron thinking about B-movies that could be about something and have real characters, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what The Walking Dead is about.
I think The Walking Dead is about who we are as humans, as individuals, when faced with the ultimate apocalypse, where not only do we have to potentially fear other humans, but at any moment we could become a zombie, we could kill our loved ones. So it's about moral and ethical choices, I think, and who we are as a society and who we are as people.
Prego.
Sandra, allora, vabbè, naturalmente io sono assolutamente una fan di Walking Dead e ho visto tutte le stagioni. Quest'ultima stagione, rispetto alle precedenti che ci avevano abituato a scene anche di massa, di zombie, molto spettacolari, mi è sembrata molto intimista, con gruppetti che venivano mostrati separatamente, con non particolari scene di zombie e con loro che inseguono questa ferrovia alla ricerca di Terminus. È una scelta solamente stilistica o anche, penso, banalmente una questione di budget, perché mi sembra tutto più economico, addirittura alla fine Terminus sembrava quasi il dietro della prigione dove erano stati nella stagione precedente. E poi seconda cosa, gli zombie in questa serie qua sembravano addirittura quasi più umani e simpatici dei protagonisti.
Lo zombie per amico.
Well, actually, there was a scene when they are headed to the veterinary hospital to get medicine for the outbreak that actually had more walkers in it than any other episode except in the first season. But we wanted to take the time to develop the characters, to invest in them. We have a very large cast, and we were introducing new characters. So it was important to us to take the time to do that. And then in terms of the zombies, I think they're just as frightening as before, but our characters, and because our characters are almost more comfortable with them, as an audience they are a predictable threat. You know what they're after, you know how to kill them, which we were learning in the first couple of seasons. So because of that, I think as an audience we feel the same way that our characters do. At the same time, one bite and you can still die, as we saw as well last season.
Abbiamo le ultime 4 domande, la prima è qui, la seconda è qui, la terza è lì e la quarta è qui. E poi purtroppo ci sono i tartarughe ninja che se la prendono con me, quindi prego.
Terminator è una specie di fil rouge di tutta la sua carriera cinematografica. A che punto è il rapporto con questo titolo? Mi pare che sia in progetto un nuovo film. E poi quanto i suoi esordi con Roger Corman l'hanno condizionata a diventare il produttore che è, quindi un produttore che fa cinema di genere.
La domanda è qui.
buonasera. Lei ha detto che...
No, aspetta, non così veloce, però facciamo rispondere, se no...
I was a fan of genre filmmaking and genre fiction before I went to work for Roger Corman. I was just lucky enough to go to work for a producer who felt the same way. And the other remarkable thing, of course, about Roger Corman is that at a time when women did not have opportunities in the film industry to do very much, Roger believed in women. And the first film that I worked on, which was Humanoids from the Deep, was directed by a woman. Women were writing films, editing films, directing films, producing films for him. So that kind of empowerment in 1978, when I went to work for him, was unprecedented. And he also gave me belief in myself, which I actually didn't have. When I came to work for him, actually when I came to my first interview with him, I thought he would ask me, how fast can you type? And this really, since this is 1978, how fast can you take shorthand? Because that's actually how you took notes back then. They weren't really, he didn't have dictaphones. And instead what he asked me is, what do you want to pursue as a career? I had no answer for that. Because most women in 1978 would have thought they were pursuing a job and not a career. So working with Roger Corman was a game changer for me. And he's the one who said, you have degrees in economics and communications. I've seen what kind of skills you have. You should be a producer. He's also the one who forced me to leave the company and said, you've learned everything that I can teach you. You should do this on your own. And he gave me the belief that Jim and I could get the Terminator made. And 99 places turned it down before the 100th said yes.
Prego.
Lei ha detto prima che è attratta dal viaggio del protagonista, insomma della condizione umana. Quando produce un film, influenza la scelta del regista o si fida totalmente del regista nella scelta del cast? Per quanto riguarda Terminator, quale condizione umana è stata forma di attrazione nei riguardi di Schwarzenegger?
I'm a very collaborative producer, but I also have an opinion. So I don't just blindly accept where the director might want to go. Just to give you an idea, on The Abyss, we cast Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio to play Lindsay. Jim had said no to her, didn't even want to audition her, so the casting director and I conspired, brought her in, and knew that Jim would have to walk down a hallway to leave the office. We placed her in that hallway so that when he went to lunch, she was sitting there. And she said, I can't wait to audition for you. Well, at that point, he couldn't say no. She auditioned for him. He thought that she was the best. But on his own, he wouldn't even have taken her audition. So sometimes, as I said before, you have to be a psychologist. And the other question was about The Walking Dead?
No, it was about Schwarzenegger, about quality.
You absolutely believe when you see Arnold Schwarzenegger that he's not going to quit. He's not going to give up. He is absolutely on task and will succeed in whatever he sets his mind to. He became governor of California. I think that if the 15th Amendment didn't prohibit people who weren't born in America running for becoming president, he would have run for president. But I was in the 25th Amendment. Anyway, so Arnold absolutely had that quality to become the Terminator. And if you weren't aware, the clip from Aliens, the android that's torn apart, that character was played by Lance Henriksen. So if you're wondering who was going to play the Terminator, that was Lance.
Prego, una domanda qui e poi una domanda lì e poi purtroppo abbiamo esaurito il nostro tempo a disposizione.
Buonasera, io volevo fare una domanda che riguarda la saga di Terminator. Terminator è una sua creazione, ovviamente anche di James Cameron, e vi siete occupati dei primi 2 episodi della saga che sono eccezionali, soprattutto il secondo, che è stato un'innovazione per gli effetti speciali e per tutto. Successivamente sono stati realizzati dei sequel, è stato realizzato il terzo film, il quarto, e l'anno prossimo uscirà il quinto, come diceva prima la signora in fondo. Però ovviamente non sono più nelle mani di James Cameron, sono passati di studio in studio e di sceneggiatori.
Credo che la signora ne sia al corrente. Qual è la domanda?
Volevo sapere se a un certo punto, prima di passare il testimone ad altre persone, lei, James Cameron, avete detto no, questo è la nostra creazione, noi non la affidiamo a nessuno, e quindi se c'è stato, avete pensato di cercare di ottenere i diritti di Terminator, un po' come George Lucas per Guerre Stellari, e di non cedere la vostra creazione ad altre persone.
Perfetto.
My checkbook isn't that big. Jim Cameron's wasn't either at the time. And we're not covered with the same artistic rights that Europe has with the Berne Convention. With the Berne Convention, you cannot make a film or adapt something without the writer, the creator's authorization. That's not the case in the United States. You can buy the rights, you don't need the permission from the authors of the work to do so. You know, we know the rules, you know, so we have to abide by them. That's the law. I think it's a much better law that you have in Europe, but unfortunately they don't apply in the United States.
Abbiamo una domanda qui, vero? Se no la torniamo lì, c'è una domanda lì, perché non abbiamo molto tempo a disposizione. Lei vuole fare la domanda? La prego, la faccia pure.
Buonasera, senta, come produttrice, dal momento che il fenomeno del binge watching si sta diffondendo a macchia d'olio con prodotti come Orange is the New Black o House of Cards di Netflix, come produttrice lei individua un cambiamento nella produzione degli show che devono appunto essere rilasciati in un blocco unico per degli spettatori che sono sempre più esigenti, o anche per questo tipo di serie, o anche come Walking Dead che continua ad avere una cadenza settimanale, si può proseguire con il filone tradizionale delle serie che lasciano lo spettatore con l'acquolina in bocca ogni settimana?
Since we're very much like the House of Cards in that with the 16 episodes and our split season, we're essentially almost completed with, we're certainly completed with the scripts for the episodes before we start airing. So we've already rolled the dice and made our choices about the new season. Before, like in traditional television, if you find that the audience isn't responding to a particular character, you can make some changes. So it really has become much more of the vision of a particular showrunner or producer, and that's really a change. You've also seen more prominent filmmakers embrace television, whether it's a David Fincher or Martin Scorsese. So it's no longer what you do when you can't get a job in features anymore. It's what you do because you have the opportunity to tell stories that you're dying to tell with characters and actors who can bring them to life. There are no actors, I think, anymore who won't star in a television series. I mean, maybe they will be limited to what we call a limited series, but every actor, I think, is looking for a great role on television because that's where the great parts are and the most interesting characters.
Abbiamo una domanda lì in fondo e sarà l'ultima domanda.
Scusi, lei crede che il videogioco di The Walking Dead abbia aiutato la serie a diventare più popolare e che in questa era sia più giusto allegare i videogiochi alle serie televisive? o l'incontrario.
Quanti anni hai?
13.
13. Un giovane, fan più giovane dell'audience, credo.
The video game, if you're not familiar with it, was actually voted Video Game of the Year, which is a very competitive prize to win. But it doesn't follow any of the characters from the comic book or the TV series. It's absolutely helped encourage people to watch the series as well as to read the comic book. Because people are engaged with the world and they're engaged with the stakes of the world, the moral and ethical decisions, because it's a video game in which the moral decisions that you make for the characters determine the gameplay. So it is essentially following the ethos of the series and to a certain extent the comic book. But at the same time, those characters are characters that are not owned by AMC. So maybe one day they'll appear in their own TV series, but it's very unlikely that they'll appear in The Walking Dead.
Vorremmo soddisfare con la signora Hurd tutta la serata per continuare a parlare, ma i prossimi ospiti sono 4, sono verdi e sono anche armati, quindi dobbiamo interrompere questa piacevole conversazione. Io vi prego di applaudire la signora Hurd e ringraziarla per essere stata Roma Fiction Fest.